Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is wrapped in a growing, deepening a series of layers of turbulence and consequence. We've got climate change, geopolitical turmoil, two plus wars, a president who doesn't not only doesn't believe in science, but is defunding science. And that's just the beginning of a long list of reasons to be deeply concerned about this juncture in human history. But at the same time, there's plenty of room still to make things better day by day. This book, the new book by my friend and former Columbia University colleague when we were both there, climate scientist Kate Marvel, is a really a vital message at this time. She's worked through several things at the same time in this book. It's a deeply personal tour of climate science history, planetary history, and personal feelings around issues that we tend to look at more mechanistically. Kate, it's great to see you here. Congratulations on the authorship.
Hey, thank you so much.
Especially with, everything going on, which we'll learn about as we go forward. I guess I remember when you were starting at Columbia, you were focused on storytelling a lot, and you did a TED Talk, which is storytelling. And I remember when you were starting to carve out the space for doing a book. And how has it gone? What surprised you just about the process of writing a book and now that it's out?
So writing a book is hard. Books have a lot of words. I thought I would do something like I was writing 800 word columns for Scientific American at the time, and I thought, oh, I'll just write 50 of those and staple them together. And that's not how it goes. I wanted the book kind of emerged over the course of years. And the thing that I felt really strongly about it is that it had to be a book, right? Like, a lot of times you hear an interview with somebody who's written a book and you're like, I get the gist of this book, or maybe this could have been an article, or this could even have been a tweet. And I wanted to write something that could not have been an article, that really was kind of a genre spanning, emotion spanning story of the planet. And so that was something that really surprised me, is that the book really was the right format for what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I want to point out one particular line that I think really summarizes things in a beautiful way. Down here in the intro, you say, I think we should be as honest about observing and documenting our emotions as we are about measuring rainfall or soil moisture. Pretending we feel nothing about our changing world doesn't make us objective. It makes us liars. And, I wrote a lot starting around 2008, 2009 about what's called cultural cognition. There's a guy at Yale who came up with that term. A lot of the times when we think we're thinking, we're actually reacting based on our priors, to use a scientific term. And so you really have to do both. And that's what's really powerful about what you've done here. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a long time I had a very naive view of science, that we were supposed to be these, perfectly objective science robots, and we weren't supposed to feel anything. Or if we did, we weren't supposed to be open about that. And yeah, after a while, I kind of came to the conclusion that one is that there's really no conflict between being a scientist and being a human being. Um, Science is not done by robots. Science is a profoundly human activity. And two is that there should be absolutely no conflict between being a scientist and having feelings, because it's fine to feel angry or hopeful or sad or afraid. And at the end of the day, physics is just physics. That doesn't change the equations of motion.
Right. And also, as Steve Schneider, who worked at the intersection of climate science and social science decades ago, he talked about even in your own work, recognizing your emotions or your priors, your existing beliefs is vital to kind of make sure you keep that line between the is and the ought, as the philosophers say. So this exercise you've gone through, I think, is really important. But let's start with the beginning. You talk about how did you come up with these 9? I mean, there's lots of dimensions to this issue.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, these were the 9 that I could think of when I wrote the book proposal. I'm not claiming that these are the only 9 emotions there are.
Sure.
Um, but you know, like there's a bunch of emotions that aren't in here, right? Apathy is not in here. Could
Yeah.
not figure out a way to make the concept of apathy an interesting chapter. Also, I don't feel like that is very useful at all.
No.
A response to the changing climate. Um, there's no chapter on joy, because I hoped that the joy would be kind of interwoven through the entire book. You know, the joy of discovery, the joy that is the flip side of grief, and the joy of doing things, the joy of looking at a situation that seems dire and seems hopeless and deciding that you're going to go on that journey, that hero's journey, right? You're going to take a step on that path and you're going to do something about it. I think there is immense joy and happiness to be found in that.
That's these are important reflections too. So you start with wonder, and I think to me the chapter on wonder is really the chapter of the revelatory quality of science itself. You go through a lot of history here, Coriolis effect, and how science has improved over the decades and centuries. The role of people like Eunice Foote. Just talk about the wonderment aspect of the book.
Yeah, I think, you know, people forget that climate science is still science. It's still this enterprise of finding out new things about the planet. And I started my career as an astrophysicist, right? Like I was looking at the entire universe. I was studying black holes and the Big Bang, because I thought that's where the kind of real wonder and awe of the world can be found. And then I realized that there's so much beautiful and amazing about this planet. And I really wanted to convey that sense of yes, like we are seeing terrible futures. We are understanding why terrible things are happening right now. But the fact that we understand the future because we understand the present. We understand that the Earth's temperature is changing because we understand why it has a temperature. And for me, that's such a source of awe. And I just wanted to begin with that. I wanted to have folks sit in that for a while because it really is a incredibly profound and for me like very moving feeling.
Absolutely, and I think any of us who are privileged and honored to be in this arena, either writing about science or doing it, really have that feeling quite frequently. You're just walking down a path, seeing the complexity and how evolution has worked, and looking up at the sky and understanding a little bit about why it is the way it is really really cool.
Mhm.
Then there's anger.
Yeah.
Why did anger come in at number 2? I mean, they're not sequencing. It's like kaboom, hello.
I mean, the anger chapter is really, you know, taking that kind of basics of here's how a climate model works, here's all the stuff that we know about this incredible planet, and then taking that as a springboard for the history of how we found out about climate science, of climate change, how we understood that the Earth was warming and it was due to greenhouse gases, and humans were putting those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And the thing about the history of us finding out things is it is intertwined with the history of people lying about the things that we found out. And that makes me really angry. So this was a very this was probably the easiest chapter to write. Because one, I found it fascinating because I actually did not know a lot of the history of climate science. I found it really useful to read the Warming Papers, which is this collection of sort of very important scientific papers, and then the History of Global Warming, which is by Spencer Weir, and I just
Great
learned
book.
so much. Great book. I learned so much from that. But then, the feeling is just that is the thing that bubbles to the surface immediately. Kind of very, very righteous anger. Like, how dare you? How dare you lie about this stuff? How dare you take the uncertainty that is so essential to science and weaponize it and pretend that because we don't know everything, we don't know anything. So that was a very sort of natural feeling for me.
Yeah, and by the way, this doesn't just focus on anger. The anger isn't just focused on like the Senator Inhofes of the world. You go back in time to some of the early history of climate science, the Eunice Foote Tyndall findings and the sequencing. And there's some interesting history about Louisa Tyndall, the wife of the scientist who really nailed in a laboratory way the greenhouse forcing, the greenhouse effect. That was kind of a wild moment. I hadn't heard about the possibility that it was that she murdered him, and
I mean, so she definitely killed him. And the scholarly historical consensus is that it was an accident. He liked to experiment and he was an insomniac. And so he wanted to, administer to himself different doses of what was it? Was it sodium chlorate? I don't know. It was some,
chloral hydrate.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so he had his wife, Louisa, give him the doses of these things when he woke up. And they had a complicated relationship. He did seem to have affection for her, but he also wrote letters about her, basically saying, she's not very attractive, but she's a really hard worker. But we all know that women can't do science. And
Right.
so one day, she accidentally gave him a very high dose of chloral hydrate, and he passed away. So
Yep.
nobody except me, and I want to be very clear that this is pure slander. I made it up. There's no historical evidence for it. But what if it wasn't an accident?
Yeah. Well, someone it's a talk about a cold case file. That's the ultimate cold case. Hold on one second. I was going to show something from the book, but now I've lost the slide deck too. Let me get that back. Where are we here? Yep. Sorry. There's no producer behind the scene here. It's just you and me. And then here's a section in anger too. You said something here I think that's valuable. I'm angry at the falsehoods, the denial, the deliberate manufacturing of doubt, but more than anything, I'm angry at the suggestion that things can never be different. I stare at the future and the climate models, projections that range from nightmare to unpleasant dream to miracle. And, I don't know if this gets at some of the sort of doom that's out there these days. There are people who've reflexively gone so far in the opposite direction from the Inhofes of the world that they're sort of serving his interests in a way.
Yeah, I think, and a lot of the doomsaying. I should say that I understand the impulse, right? Like, this is scary, this is overwhelming, the uncertainty. We know that human beings do not deal very well with uncertainty.
Right.
That is the thing that makes us anxious. But a lot of the predictions of inevitable doom, I think, are really based on an understanding of human nature. People are the way that they are, and I don't think that exists. I think if you look at, and I did a lot of reading in history for this book, if you look at the historical record, people do not behave in very predictable ways. People are really, really complicated. And what the science says right now, which is incredibly clear, is that to a large extent, the future is still very much in human hands. And that how hot will it be 50 years from now? I mean, that really is a consequence of what we decide to do. And I'm not denying that things look pretty dire right now. I'm not denying that the problems are getting much, much worse. But at the same time, the solutions are getting better. And even given the political environment right now, even given all of the forces sort of arrayed against climate action, all of the things that there are to be genuinely really mad about, I still think it's worth understanding that giving up is, we say giving up is not an option. Giving up is an option. Lots of people are taking that option, but
Mhm.
giving up is not the inevitable outcome of what we're seeing right now.
Right, and that generates justifiable. Oh shoot! I just spilled coffee on my computer.
Oh no, you were so
Speaking
angry.
of unpredictable, well, actually, it is predictable. Hopefully, it won't die. Let's just keep going and hoping. That's the hope. Hold on one second. Hilarious. So from anger to guilt. Here, you use the word guilt mostly here in the context of the who done it part. You know, who is guilty, and just talk about how you walk through the different pathways and arguments, and it's the sun, it's natural variability, etc.
Sure. So this is something that, and Andy, you'll have to stop me if I go on for too long, because this is actually, something that I
Yeah,
spent a lot of my scientific career thinking about, which is attribution. So, how do we know that the changes that we're seeing are indeed changes, as opposed to just sort of natural or internal variability of the climate system? And how do we know that it's us? So, like scientists do think very hard about the natural things that can change the climate. If the sun was getting hotter, that would make the earth hotter. Trust me, if the sun were getting hotter, somebody at one of the world space agencies would have noticed this. It's not. So it's not the sun. It's not the wobbles in the Earth's orbit that we know cause the ice ages, because those happen on very, very long time scales. We know that it's not volcanoes. So even though volcanoes do change the climate, when there's a big volcanic eruption, it puts so much gas and dust in the atmosphere that it can block the sun and really cool the planet. So we have lots of, evidence in history for times when this happened. But no big volcano has gone off since 1991. That was Mount Pinatubo in the
right.
Philippines. And anyway, we're not
And in the
cooling.
meantime, CO2 is accumulating, and the sulfates are reducing,
Yeah,
and here we are.
yeah. So
Yeah,
it's,
maybe we can kind of move forward, because that chapter, at least for you and me, I've been writing about this since 1988, and I think most of the people who listen to my stuff are beyond the basics of the attribution question. And so far, my computer is still working despite the coffee dose. Here you do kind of summarize things. Now we are the guilty ones, the ones causing climate change. Those of us who turn on the lights and drive our cars and use our things made with energy of ancient sunlight. And here, you take it beyond the folks you're angry at, and also acknowledge that essentially humanity has this fundamental drive for energy abundance. We love energy, and our sources right now still are predominantly fossil. And so there's that reality too, and maybe that's part of why it's hard for us to kind of fully take ownership of that.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think understanding the sort of guilt in the moral sense, like the real feeling of culpability, that is important. I don't think wallowing in that guilt is very useful, because feeling shame does not take a single molecule of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And you talked about energy. Like we have plenty of energy. I'm looking out the window. There's plenty of energy coming from the sun and the sky right now.
Right.
So, it's not, I think, necessarily a question of we are morally evil and we must be punished and we must necessarily sacrifice. We're going to have to do things differently. But I think one of the underappreciated points that should be made about climate action is that a lot of the low carbon technologies are just better. They're just the future. Like digging up old stuff and setting it on fire is not a very efficient way to generate electricity. And living in far-flung places where we have to drive everywhere in huge vehicles, that is a fine choice for people who want to make that choice. But there's a lot of people who want to live in more walkable areas, and I think thinking about how to make that a more affordable and accessible choice for the people who want to live like that, I think, you know, that is a world that is better, not a world that is worse.
I couldn't agree more. So fear. I have some images here from back when you mentioned you were in the city, of course, when Hurricane Ida, the remains of it came through and caused this insane flash flooding. That picture on the left is a New York Police Department officer trying to get into the basement where two immigrants and their child were drowned. And it haunts me all the time to think about the avoidable nature of so much of the loss that happened, not just in that flood, but in others. And there is a real sense of, when you consider that what's happened so far is really without a lot of action, both to boost resilience and to slow warming, is just the beginning.
Andy, I don't know if it's just me. I'm getting a lot of static.
Uh-oh. I hope that's not the, it's probably the, I might have to switch to this camera. I think we had a coffee calamity. Can you hear me right now?
I can hear you just fine. Yeah.
No more of the static.
Mm-mm.
I'm fearing for my computer, but let's get back to what we were talking about. So fear, the fear element here. Just describe that when you're working on this day to day. You're writing about it for a couple of years here. Uh, how do you characterize that fear for yourself, and then what you're doing about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the fear that comes out of the physics, right? The inevitable consequences of what we're seeing, right? Like warm air holds more water vapor. There's just more that can be dumped on us. And that's why we're seeing heavier downpours. But at the same time, we know that warm air is thirstier air. So we're seeing more evaporation from the surface, and that increases drought risk. We know that warm water is hurricane food. And so we're seeing stronger hurricanes that intensify more quickly and are more difficult to predict. Hot, dry conditions, that's fire weather. So even though fire is very complex and it depends on fuel availability and ignition, and those things depend on policies and human choices, we do know that fire weather is increasing. Um, so there's all this stuff that physics gives us to be afraid of, right? These big monsters that are coming for us in the future. But the thing that scares me the most is that climate change happens in the world that we've built for it. And it happens in this sort of deeply unequal world that is not governed in an optimal way. And so there's this notion that, oh, we'll just adapt. And there's no just about adaptation. But the notion that all decisions will be made in an equitable manner by looking soberly at the best available science, I just don't think that that is supported by either current events or the historical record. And so, the thing that I am the most frightened about when it comes to climate change is what it's going to make us do to each other.
Yeah, and I've written a lot about that aspect of it. And when Biden was in office, there was all this money available for resilient communities, for example. But the history of that money is it goes to communities that have the capacity to apply for it, and
Mhm.
they're billionaires in the Hamptons were getting money to have sand pumped onto the beaches, while truly vulnerable communities don't even have the capacity to seek the revenue. And now, of course, under Trump, you can forget about all of that. Itself is unraveling. So that notion you center on, I think, is a keystone issue for people going forward. And of course, there's also this tendency of us to not to reach for our own oxygen mask first, and maybe not even think about the one next to us. I think people have that capacity and ability, but globally, you're right. The adaptation funds under the UN process, the idea that rich countries are going to spend to help poor countries be resilient is bullshit. It's just not happening.
Yeah. Even though it's arguably very much in the interest of rich countries.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Having a more resilient world means less conflict. Grief. Yeah, here the picture at the top is me. I took that picture of the Rockaways when they were after one of the post Sandy things they were doing was building these giant berms of sand in the Rockaways as storm impacts were increasing. And the one below is from your home state back in the day, California. An incredible picture taken by a Forest Service firefighter during one of the conflagrations a few years ago. Grief is a hard one, right? Because it's sort of, well, in the book you do a good job of characterizing the various dimensions here, but maybe you can just talk about that briefly too.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are going to have to reckon with the fact that even in the best of all possible worlds, we're still going to lose a lot of what we love. And so there's sort of that anticipatory grief, that knowing that a lot of the things that we thought would last forever, or at least outlast us, are not going to. Um, and but there are things that are changing right now. There are things that have already been lost. So I talked about California because I love California. For a very long time, I'm based in New York now, but I just insisted that I was a Californian, and I think there is a part of my soul that will always be in California, and I miss it. And I look back at home, and home is changing. It's becoming unrecognizable. We see the fires and the fires. What we saw very recently, the fire that kind of swept through Altadena, the northern part of LA, and it's hard. It's hard to watch that, and it's hard to know that this is only going to get worse in the future. And there's this real sense of loss and sadness looking back at that.
My dogs are barking, so I had silenced my mic for a second there. Kim M says, "Good morning. All that we can save," which was a book you contributed to, I believe. Hopefully, there'll be more questions and comments. And then you have this. This line really struck me too. You're talking about parenthood and the things that you know about the world that may not be in the experience of your kids or their kids, or our dogs. You said you've gotten some pushback from people even about having kids. And I know you're not alone on that. I've talked to many other people in this arena, especially you. This gets back to that doom paralysis community. Can you just talk about that aspect of your human life as a person, as a wife, as a mother, in the context of these issues?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when people say, you should never have had kids, I cannot accept that. I can't accept that the world would be better off without what is for me the best thing in it. And I do think that having children is a gamble. It's a step into the unknown. It's a bet that humans aren't evil, or at least they can be not evil enough that excuses the decision to make more of them. But I do think that, and this has always been this way, I think through all of human history, that when you have a child, you have made a commitment to the future. And it is therefore incumbent on you to try to make that future as good as possible for them. And I think that doesn't just apply to parents. I think that applies to everybody, because we are collectively the ancestors of the generations that come after us. And I think that we all, whether or not we individually choose to have children, we all have that responsibility toward the future. I can't hear you anymore, I'm afraid.
That was the dog muting, not the coffee. Sorry. No, this chapter on surprise was interesting. The word surprise surprised me. But when I dug in, of course, I realized it's mostly about the complexity and uncertainties, which can cut both ways. I still remember this. There's a Wall Street Journal article here I have a picture of. Hey, CEOs, have you hugged the uncertainty monster lately? And I thought it was a wonderful article about embracing it, not feeling like you can necessarily reduce it, and then finding ways to act in with it in the room. And that's come up many times in the climate discussion too. Is see, well, we don't know yet, or we need to know. And a lot of scientists, even the IPCC process, to me, falsely conveys a sense that wait for the seventh report or the eighth report, and we'll have this nailed for you. And you seem to, well, I think you agree with what my thinking, which is these are inevitable aspects of dealing with a complex issue like this. Just talk about your definition of surprise in this context.
Yeah, I think, there are still so many things about this planet that can surprise us, right? And that is a fundamental aspect of science, is that you answer one question and 10 more questions pop up. So we're never going to be done. We're never going to say, okay, well, now we understand everything and it's time to stop doing science. So yeah, I kind of wanted to write about the things that we still don't know to kind of to fill in the gaps there, to show people, well, this is the main source of scientific uncertainty. I think you're right that sometimes there is a demand for answers and for products that don't exist and can never exist. People want to know, well, if I buy beachfront property, at what hour and day will I
Right.
have to sell that? And we can't do that. That's never going to be possible. There's so much uncertainty and randomness in the system, and it's hard, I think, or has historically been hard for scientists to talk about uncertainty because of this conflation, the fact that it gets weaponized against us. If we say, I don't know this, that can then be taken to mean, oh, well, you're admitting you don't know anything. And we do know stuff. We know a lot. There's some things that we are really certain about. Gravity is real, birds are real, carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases make the earth warm. Like, we are totally sure about that. But then knowing that, then that raises a whole bunch more questions down the road that we're still nailing down the answer to.
Yeah, and you in the section on climate sensitivity, there's still a range, and what people can mistake, just as you said, is uncertainty is really bounded knowledge. It's plus or minus. It gives you it's actually gives you that
Mhm.
you have that, which is different than ignorance,
Yeah.
and that gives you a sense of direction. And hold on, pride. Here too, there's if I got this right, and I read the book very quickly yesterday. There's two sections on pride. One is pride goeth before a fall. In other words, geoengineering. We think we can just manage this planet like we're managing a car that we don't really understand how it works. And then you have the pride in what people are doing behind the scenes, often behind the scenes, to drive decarbonization progress and resilience boosting and stuff. The maybe just talk through that the key points as you see them.
Yeah, I think, folks usually want me to have a very clear takeaway when it comes to geoengineering. And I think the only
Mhm.
clear takeaway I can give you is it's not easy. It's not a magic bullet. We are inadvertently geoengineering the planet right now, and nobody doubts that. The temperature is rising. We know that's because we're putting greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So no change, no human intervention in the planet is no longer an option, really.
Right.
And so that's why people have started to float these ideas that I think are truly wild. We're going to, I see you've got a little photo or a little cartoon here of a jet putting stuff in the
Right.
stratosphere. So that is a plane which is spraying aerosols into the upper atmosphere in order to block the sun. And we think that would work if the definition of work is to cool the planet.
Right.
But going back to uncertainty, there are things that we know would probably go wrong with that. It would probably mess up the water cycle and affect precipitation patterns places. There are things that we know that we don't know. And then there are things that we don't know that we don't know.
Right.
And so that is a really sort of terrifying prospect. And so my personal view is that I really support research into the consequences of this in climate models. I think climate scientists need to simulate it. I think we need to understand the basic science of it. But I fundamentally think that all of this really careful research, it's not really going to matter because the decision to deploy or not to deploy it should not be a scientific decision, and it won't be a scientific decision. You've got the cartoon of jets, like,
Yeah.
that is relatively cheap. A billionaire
Yep.
could unilaterally decide to do this. And even if it's not a billionaire, even if it's a group of countries, we don't have a governance structure that is capable or would ever be capable of making that decision to do or not to do on behalf of all humanity.
Right. Yeah. Again, the people who have the most vulnerability, in developing countries particularly, have the least voice in any decision like that. For a long time, I've been writing about this, and I do see, there have been these ridiculous small scale examples, like the guys in the Bay Area who are floating balloons and selling selling carbon credits. I'm glad that the Trump administration seems to be cracking down on them, because I think it's outrageous. But at that global scale, I find it impossible to think we can't even agree on how to slow down emissions of CO2. I don't think there'll ever be a global agreement on where to set the thermostat for the planet.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that's terrifying, right? The fact that what if somebody does it? What if a
yeah,
country unilaterally does that and then a typhoon hits China? And
right.
it won't matter if the attribution science cannot draw a clear link between the geoengineering and the typhoon.
Yeah,
That's still a very frightening world to live in.
it is. That's something that doesn't frighten me, because I don't see any. I mean, this is just me, 40 years in. I don't see it in any country's interest to do a global intervention like SRM, solar radiation management, when there are so many things you could do locally to reduce your vulnerability to heat or whatever. But that's just me. Who knows what people are going to decide, as you say, and that's scary.
Uh-huh.
And then you do talk about carbon capture and sequestration, um, which you seem to have a different attitude about. To me, it is something that, not just research, but demonstration projects, and getting the scale,
Yeah.
testing scale is important. Although I still see it as completely insufficient
Yeah, so
approach.
I want to make a big distinction here between carbon capture and sequestration, which I don't necessarily support and I don't really talk about in the book. So that's basically point source carbon capture. So you do something that
Mhm.
emits carbon dioxide, you capture that, and then you somehow dispose of that. So what I talk about is large scale carbon dioxide removal. And so carbon dioxide removal is a different proposition because it says, well, the problem is caused by too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And we know that carbon dioxide is pretty long lived in the atmosphere. We put it there, and if it's not immediately removed by the carbon cycle, it's going to stay up there for centuries or even millennia. So we got to figure out a way to take the carbon dioxide out of the air. And so one of the best ways to get carbon dioxide out of the air is plants. Plants are really good at taking CO2 out in order to make more of themselves. Like that's how plants grow. That's how photosynthesis works. And so reforestation, letting forests grow back where they used to be, is an example of a carbon dioxide removal strategy. So there's these what are called nature-based solutions, restoring forests, restoring seagrass meadows are very good at taking carbon out of the atmosphere. Basically, and they're great for biodiversity as well. And then there's these kind of engineered solutions, so things like direct air capture, which is literally like sucking carbon dioxide out of the air using technology. That's expensive. It takes a lot of electricity. I guess the point that I'm making is that there's a lot of these options on the table for how to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And I personally am very supportive of not just studying, but trying to deploy these things as quickly as possible. But I think we have to understand that they are only ever going to be a tiny, tiny part of the solution. You can take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, but if you keep putting it in there in such vast quantities, then that's just going to be a waste of time and money.
Yep. And money, particularly, because money is going to be scarce in this arena. A little bit, the section, you close the section on pride with the upbeat version. Pride in every electrician who rewires a house, every accountant who helps people access clean energy tax credits, every engineer working on low carbon cement, etc. There are these. This is all around the world. It's still happening, even with what Trump is doing. And I'm just showing a picture there of the heat pumps we had installed here in Maine several years ago. Maine had, even without the federal credits, Maine has been, along with fighting Trump, Janet Mills, there's been a longstanding support here for cutting Mainers' oil costs and getting them on the grid more. And there's more.
It's heating oil, right? Or
yeah, mostly historically, the Northeast still has millions of homes on heating oil. And Maine is, we know the house we are in didn't have that, but it's a big issue. So there's another kind of pride too, like a positive pride.
Yeah, I mean, there's pride in a job well done,
Yeah, and a job being done.
Yeah.
Well done implies it's over.
Yeah.
I guess that's one of the hardest things in this arena is I talk about environmental challenges with people. When I was at National Geographic Society one time, they were planning on they had a new mission statement that was about like, a world planet in balance. And I was thinking, I was arguing against it because to me, that implies most people think about balance as like, oh, now we can sit by the lake and smoke a cigar and we're done. And to me, the balance is more like hot yoga, holding a position. It takes perpetual work. And that certainly, is that your characterization of the climate challenge?
Yeah. I mean, we will never solve this problem in our lifetime. The work of building a world that not only does not put greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but is also just better and more equitable and less scary and kinder. That's not something that's going to be achieved in a human lifetime or even kind of a civilization's lifetime. Like that is a project where there's always going to be something more to do. And I'm not sure that's unique to climate change. I think that's just how we work. Like we are never going to achieve perfection and then shut off our brains and never have to do anything else again. There's always going to be something to do.
And that leads to hope. We're closing in toward the final chapter. You talk through some of the history of problem solving in the environmental arena, going back to, I wrote in my 2018 book with my wife on the history of weather and climate knowledge, the dark moment in England in the early 50s when they had this horrific smog, the Great Smog, led to their Clean Air Act in 1956, 14 years before our Clean Air Act. And you talk through a bunch of other examples going forward, which is a little different than sometimes hope is just flashed around as an emblem. emblematic kind of word, but you have clearly an active definition of it in your head.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that we even need hope. It's fine if you have it, I have it. It helps keep me motivated. But it's kind of I don't know what you think, but I kind of find it the wrong question, right? Like, it's like asking, "Do you hope you can clean the bathroom?" Like, I don't know, just clean the bathroom, you know? You know what to do. And I kind of feel that way when it comes to climate change. Like, okay, yeah, sure, fine, I have hope, but, like, more importantly, I know what's causing this, and I know what to do. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's the active nature of that hope. And, the fact that nothing is inevitable, right? You know, us winning this fight is not inevitable, but doom is not inevitable either. Like, we are writing our own story right now.
Right. And then love. And here you get into your personal travails in recent years and with health and the tangled nature of thinking about what around us is ephemeral and how you stay engaged when there's uncertainty at these other levels. Can you talk about Mitch a little bit?
Yeah, so Mitch is the name of my blood clot in my brain. Mitch almost killed me. I was very lucky that he was caught in time. There's still sort of long-standing effects of that. And that was a very profound experience for me, going from just being very healthy and taking it completely for granted, to really kind of having to confront my own mortality, and the uncertainty and the fact that, there wasn't a miracle cure, that, I'm not dead, but I'm also not fine. Um, and that is for me of a parallel with thinking about living on this changing planet. Going back to your point about like too much doom versus blind optimism, and when will this story ever end, and knowing that it won't end, and knowing that there is this uncertainty that we are always going to have to live with, but also knowing how connected we are to every other living thing on this planet, and the inanimate things, the air and the rock and the water. That for me really made me feel connected to this world in a way that maybe I took for granted before.
Yeah, back in 2011, when I was 55, I had a stroke out of the blue, not because of arteriosclerosis or anything like that. And I went through some of those same dynamics, although it turned out to be something that was resolvable. And I wrote about it in the Times as my lucky stroke because it didn't necessarily have that lingering feeling you're talking about. But you have this line here that really struck me in the sense I live now in a strange little limbo, never sure whether to expect a sudden catastrophe or simply the inevitable slow decline into something worse than now. This is a feeling for which a career in climate science has prepared me well. I was very struck by that. And there's a comment that just came in, a couple of comments that I'm going to put on the screen. Chelsea Valentine says, "This is hitting the spot. I feel like I need to go back to school because my hope drains as the delay continues, delay by institutions to address the issues presented here." She says, my hope is huge, but then I look at tuition to go back to school, see the duration, see the wasted time that needs to be dedicated to action. So hard to maintain that hope. Any thoughts, suggestions?
Yeah, I think, so my friend Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson has a book that came out last September that I find really a useful framing when we think about that kind of active hope. So her book's called What If We Get It Right? And she addresses what I think is the real important nature of climate action, which is that it has to be all of us. It has to leverage not just science, not just technology or policy, but basically every aspect of everything humans do. So, do you have a job? If your job takes place on planet Earth, congratulations, you have a climate job. You don't need to have sustainability in your job title to actually think about how to make change. So
Right.
the organization that I used to be at, Project Drawdown, who I think are incredible, they have climate action job guides for people who are in HR, for people who are in procurement, for people who are making investment decisions. So
Right.
no matter what you do, you can actually drive climate action. And no matter what you care about and what you're good at. So Ayana has this Venn diagram of thinking
Right.
about what you're good at, what gives you joy, and what needs to be done. And at the intersection of those three things, that's what you should be doing. So a lot of times people think, oh, I need to go and I need to do this one very, very specific thing. And if that is not the thing that you're good at, and if that's not the thing that you can keep up in a sustained way for the rest of your life, because we're going to need that, that's not what you should be doing. And I think, fortunately, there's so much that does need to be done.
Yeah, and to me, I think I've articulated this off and on over the years. The worst thing about the climate problem is it's multidimensional and big. I call it a complexity monster. The best thing about it is that it's big and complex, meaning everyone has a facet they can work on,
Yeah, I
and
agree.
that's hopefully that can help Chelsea and others navigate forward. Um, Kim M also said, Dr. Mann's latest message, this is Michael Mann, I assume, was a little ominous for me. We have to get ready. We have to work really hard to make structural changes to decarbonize. Our current climate is just an appetizer for the climate buffet of disasters that's baking in the oven. I mean, I might add on to that, we have this Trump time right now as well. And I know it's something people feel a lot of doomy feelings about as well. Kate, I don't know if you've like grappled with the political realities we're in. As I said earlier, I mean, Jacqueline Gill at the University of Maine, a friend of ours, both lost a grant, and so much stuff going on. Uh, any quick thoughts on this part of it? Have we?
Yeah. So, yeah, I should clarify that I am an employee of the federal government, but I am on leave right now, so I'm speaking totally in my personal capacity. I think, and this is a point that Catherine Hayhoe makes, and that she makes extremely well. That if you actually look at the surveys and the polling, the vast majority of people in America want the government to do something on climate change. The vast majority of people are either totally freaked out or at least concerned. But if you also, another aspect of the polling is that most people wildly underestimate how much other people care about climate change. So most people say, I am very, very worried, but nobody else is. And then if you start talking about it, you realize that, oh, everybody feels the same way as me. And the hardcore deniers, that's like a tiny single digit fraction of the population. And so, yeah, things are bad right now. Not just kind of vis-a-vis climate change, but democracy, the arts, science, creativity in general. There are a lot of forces arrayed against that. But if you look at the people, including me, in the streets, this past Saturday, if you look at the people who are standing up, who are pushing back, I think I said I don't need hope, but despite myself, that gives me hope nonetheless.
Yeah, and in this arena, and this is a very long and unsatisfying timeline to think about, but living in Maine now, these past 4 years, particularly, which people think of as purple, it's really red and blue. It's like pixelated red and blue. So I have neighbors who are gun-toting Trumpers and neighbors who are progressive, and we have a congressman who's sort of the House of Representatives version of Joe Manchin. He's a Democrat, but votes against a lot of the Democrats' agendas. And I've found that I can build relationships and conversations with neighbors who are deeply different on these issues around particular points. The warming of the Gulf of Maine is disrupting fisheries, period.
Yeah.
And you can start to create conversations that can go toward some of the dimensional solution pathways without even talking about global warming or climate change. And it feels to me like a way to pursue action that will always feel insufficient, but it's in the trajectory of progress. I don't know if that you've come across that kind of
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think because this is such a big global problem, the sort of climate activist community has to actually encompass the vast majority of people on the planet. And that means that we need to find ways of meeting people where they're at. We need to find ways of, sort of saying maybe you don't need to agree with us on everything, but maybe there are things that we can agree on, right?
Right.
And if we say, if we always, I know what doesn't work on me. I'm not a social scientist. I haven't studied climate communication, but I know what doesn't work on me personally. Like, I don't like being scolded. I don't like being shamed. And I don't like being told that there's nothing I can do. And just for me personally, I tend to shut down. But if I'm engaged with like, did you know that the water on Earth is older than the sun? That's a great in to people because everybody is amazed by some aspect of the planet that we live on. And if you talk about, hey, like, did you know that there's a way to keep your house hot and cold that is way cheaper and better than burning fuel oil?
Right.
Maybe that's an entry as well. So I totally agree with you that we don't. I think there can be a tendency, and I feel it in myself, to demand that people have the right views on absolutely everything, and that's never going to happen. That's not how people work.
Great. Well, Kate Marvel, it's been great to have you on Sustain What to discuss your book, Human Nature: 9 Ways to Feel About Our Changing Planet. And the book has lots of background on how to do things to make for better relationships with others and in pursuit of a better planet and more a humane, the best of our humane qualities going forward to address this epic challenge of climate change and climate vulnerability reduction. Good luck with the book. I think it's a great one and a great addition to the lexicon on this issue, along with Ayana's and others. And take care of yourself. And for anyone watching, you can share this as soon as we're done on the various platforms you have been watching on, and also on revkin.substack.com, my adventure in trying to maintain some sense of traction and progress in a complicated time. Thanks, Kate.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye.
Take care. Bye.